we are going to talk about Meteor 1.3, React, ES6 modules, and try to pull all that together. Try to pull all that together and do a little live coding session. That's why there are two of us. So Luis is going to do the hard work, and I'm going to do the blah blah blah. So I'm basically going to watch what he's doing and try to work out what it means, and then maybe try to explain it. Okay. So we're going to create a Meteor project, and we're specifying that we want to use the Meteor 1.3 beta release. If you do this without the release flag, then you'll just get the latest stable version of Meteor. So you can pass in a release flag, and this just changes, right? You need to use whatever the most current is.
Can you increase a little bit of font?
Yeah.
How much more? That's okay. That's enough.
Then this takes, actually creating the project doesn't take a little while, but starting it can take a little while. Yeah, so you need to check what the latest release is. And isn't it not a specific module release? No?
No, it's new. The 11 is not related to modules anymore.
Okay, so yeah, because there used to be different release, beta release strains, and now they've all come together. Okay, so we're going to start the Meteor project. We're going to, what do I need to do?
That's perfect.
Here's my.
Yep.
And
so open it in my IDE.
I'm going to open the.
So we make a meetup. So typical first.
So this is the starting point, right? You install Meteor, you do a Meteor create, it gives you like some example files, an HTML file, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file. You can see that the build process and the initial run takes a little time because it's using NPM to load a bunch of stuff, and it takes a while the first time you get it started.
Okay, so
now
we
we're
are
up and running. So we had Meteor, we're running, and now we're going to create that package.json file. Because we're using ES6 modules, then we need to track our dependencies with NPM. So this is something that comes with Meteor 1.3, is that you can use package.json and you can use NPM modules directly in your Meteor code. You don't have to go into a package and do all that kind of magic, which we had to do before.
Which version of NPM?
The question is, which version of NPM? The answer to that is, I don't know.
Yeah,
which version of Node is more important for
I think the Node version is integrated in Meteor anyway.
Yeah.
And so I played around with like the latest versions of Node for the NPM import, and so I think the 0.10 is kind of deprecated, and so like for the import everything works fine with the latest 5.7 for example. So yeah, but we'll rely on that. So maybe we didn't have any issues right now with different Node versions on the machine. Normally you don't need it.
I tried to deploy something and I saw that it's needed very, very old version and 0.10.
Yeah.
And it was this little bit confusing
You
for
did
me.
deploy with M-up or maybe? M-up or how did you deploy?
I deploy on my server with Jenkins and
Okay.
So some talk about deployments and challenges there. Maybe we can circle back to that.
Sorry.
Maybe I use the command.
So with React, we're going to work with React. You need to use flow router. There's no React support in Iron Router. Or it's a lot easier if you use flow router. I'm not 100% sure there's no support in Iron, but this makes life easier.
Okay, installing the npm packages.
Okay, so this is significant because what we're doing here is using npm inside the Meteor directory to install React and React DOM, which means we're getting the npm package versions and not the versions from Atmosphere. So Valentin talked about Atmosphere, and Atmosphere is a blessing and a curse. It is a full stack packaging system, but it's also a completely custom packaging system. And we've run into some issues where there are some bugs or some unexpected behaviors, depending where you get different packages, depending on the environment that you run. And building a packaging system is a non-trivial thing. And so NPM is extremely widely used and very battle tested, while Atmosphere is more early stage. And so it has some big advantages to be able to use NPM directly in the directory, directly inside the project. Yeah?
How do you solve the issue if you need to use some Atmosphere packages, but you would like to rely on the Node packages? So then you have two packaging systems.
So the question is, how do you resolve the challenges between having Atmosphere packages and Node packages and NPM
Yeah,
packages?
if you can't really rely only on the Node, so you really would like to use something from Atmosphere.
So you're always using Atmosphere packages in the sense, or you're always using Meteor packages in the sense that all the Meteor core packages are being installed from the Meteor packaging system. So the two do sit side by side. There are some challenges if you try to use packages in Atmosphere which have dependencies on, for example, React in Atmosphere, and then it doesn't work. So you need to resolve those manually. There's no kind of simple solution. You can try, like, you can often fork and change the dependencies, and maybe things will work. Or you can try that.
Okay, so yeah, I think I will just create our first component, which then will be rendered by React Mounter, which is npm package for flow. What's the name? React layout from Kadira, which is related to the npm packages, and you have to use that one instead of the React layout package from Atmosphere, because the Atmosphere package has dependencies on the Atmosphere React packages, so you end up with two React versions, which will run into major problems. So
one question for the dependencies between the packaging systems. You have any live project experience? It sounds like a real pain.
So we're building. So the question is, do we have real experience with these inter-packaging system dependencies? And it seems like a real pain. So we have real projects built with. We're building with this stack right now, and sure, it's a pain. On the other hand, I mean, there's pain, and there's no getting away from it, right? But React also brings its own kind of pain.
Any recommendations how to release pain or to have not so much pain?
Or to enjoy it?
The question is, any recommendations to reduce the pain? It's less painful than having to build your own gulp, build process. It's less painful than having to deal with all of that traditional crap. So
are they planning to bridge this somehow? Because I'm not into Meteor, but there's the Meteor core packages. Then there's the Atmosphere packaging system. So they are already two different ones, or?
So the question is, are they going to bridge the two packaging systems between Atmosphere and NPM? And that's difficult to predict. I don't think there's any official statements. Some people are suggesting that Meteor is going to move away from Atmosphere and rely more on NPM, but that's an open question, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
yeah, so that's our first simple React component, which we build with ES6 classes instead of the React create class, which still would work, but yeah, I think the general opinion is, even from React, I think that they will move to ES6 classes anyway someday. I think there are some issues with that. We can discuss this maybe later.
Yeah, so there's two different ways you can build. Like you can build React components with the React.create class function, and you pass it an object, or you can use an ES6 class like this, and you extend an existing object. There are workarounds, but yeah, all of this stuff is still fairly early stage. We're using this in a production project, or we're building a production system with this. And we haven't, to be honest, we haven't had massive challenges. It has not been like a real nightmare, but there have been some small headaches that we've run into along the way. So we're going to create the first root. It's important to remember here that you need to import React when you're defining your roots, because you need React in your thing. Can we make the text a little bit? And then we're going to use mount from the React mounter inside the root action.
Yeah, so this should work normally, but it doesn't, because so it should render the root on the app, right, or the app component. But the thing here is there's two ways, and one way is to import the component. That's what we should do. But now, because it's just exported in here, but we have to import it manually in the root file.
Yeah, so because we're using ES6 modules, we're not automatically defining anything in the global scope, in the component definition, which is a blessing and a curse. It's more explicit, but it requires more code, and it involves a lot more headbanging when you run into problems where you forget to import something and can't figure out why it's not working. So now we imported it explicitly, and now it's rendering the component problem.
Right. Another component. So let's just, I think that we just take the app as a layout, to render a layout, so you can put in here a header, whatever, and render your content in the render function. So you always have to wrap it in a React element. So that's the return of the render function. So
this is a little gotcha that bit me in the ass a few times. Your return can only return a single element. So you cannot return two sibling elements. And so the easiest way is usually just to wrap everything in a div. And that way you're returning one which has multiple children.
Yeah, so what I do here is like I render the title of the app, for example, and then I use the props of React, which is the properties which get injected into a component from a parent, a component, whatever it is. It could be like if we think about state managers, for example, like there's all these concepts of Redux and etc. So and this is how I call the props which gets injected, and in this case it gets injected by the router. So we create I have to refactor the root here somehow.
So what we're doing now is we're taking the component and we're passing it in some content. So with Blaze templates, you can have these like global templates which always get rendered, and then you can have other stuff that gets rendered in specific places. This is more or less what we're doing here, but it's a little bit more explicit. So what we're doing now is we're mounting the app component and we're defining what its props should be. And we're passing in the props, which in this case we're calling content. So we're defining that inside this component called app, there will be a value called content, and the value of that is index. And index is in itself another React component. And so this is the way that you build layouts with React, and that you build structures. You always have one component that it contains other components. And so it's a little bit like templates and using sub-templates, but it's a lot more explicit. And you can have a lot more levels of abstraction. So you can have, for example, components which render a user's avatar, and you pass in the user object. And then if you want to have a list of users, you can have a component which maps over a list of users and then renders one component per user and stuff like that. So here we create the index component. We're just returning a div with the word index in it. And again, we need to import this into the roots file, because right now this is not available inside the roots file. And so it's the same process again. We need to import index. The whole importing process can be challenging. If you're used to the language Go, then you're going to love this because it's very, very explicit. And otherwise, it can take a little bit of getting used to. The explicitness gives you a lot more control, and it avoids all these problems of polluting the global scope, and a lot of the magic that happens in Blaze is because stuff is just global. You can call register template helper. You can register a template helper anywhere in your code. You can call it anywhere else in your code. And later, when you try to form those links, when you're looking at someone else's code and trying to figure out what does this function do, it can be difficult to figure out those chains. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to integrate Meteor data into the React component. And the way that this works at the moment is with a mixin. And so we add the React Meteor data package, which is a core Meteor package, and then we add the npm React mixin package, and that, I guess it's a little dash, maybe?
What?
Dash? React dash mixin working?
No.
I think npm packages are lowercase. So, yeah,
Yeah,
so
sure.
you add one package from Atmosphere and you add another package from npm. And the npm package just allows us to apply some mixins to our React controllers. So in mixin, they may be going out of fashion, but the concept of a mixin is that you take something, for example, you take an object and you apply a function to it which modifies it in some way. So adds some properties or adds some methods to it. And it's a way of automating repeatable parts that you want in classes. So now that we have our index component, we have to import React mixin. That's important because otherwise it won't work. And then we call the React mixin function. We pass it the index prototype, and then we pass it the React Meteor data mixin, and this is defined in the global scope by the Atmosphere package. So what that allows us to do is define a class method called getMeteorData. And this is how you get Meteor's reactivity into React. So you define a getMeteorData function, and in here you can do all of your typical Meteor find queries. You can use minimongo, you can call method. Well, methods probably don't work very well, but so for example, you can do list.find.fetch, you return an object, and then because React is itself reactive, this allows Meteor's reactivity to be hooked in. And so now, instead of using this.state, which is React's kind of component level reactivity, you use this.data. And whenever you use this.data, it automatically creates the dependency on the getMeteorData function, and then reactivity just works inside your React components. And so this is the bridge between the React world and the Meteor world. And you need to remember to run that mixin function. You need to remember to import these things. And if you forget, then you will have all kinds of pain. I can attest from personal experience.
So, okay, I just created a collection, which is available on server and client. So, and we going to insert something in here.
Okay, so now we're in the browser console. And those of you familiar with Meteor will know that you can use Mongo in the browser console as if you were on the server. And when you first create a Meteor package, it adds Meteor project, it adds two packages, insecure and auto-publish, which mean all the data on the server is automatically on the client, and the client can automatically insert data to the server. And so you don't have to do anything, you just call insert in the browser console, and it magically appears on the server. and this is all done for you. So now what we're going to do is, instead of just having a render function, within that render function we're going to call another function. So this is JSX, which means that you write normal JavaScript, except you can also write, with the opening angle bracket, you can write HTML tags. And these HTML tags get compiled by the JSX compiler into JavaScript React.createElement or create class calls. And so what we're doing here is we're defining a function which we can call inside of our render function, which will render some lists. And so you can see that what we're doing here, we're saying we're using this.data, and then we're getting the lists property of that, which we defined in the getMeteorData function above, and then we're using JavaScript's native.map, which allows us to apply an iterator function to every element in the list, and then that returns an array. So this is pure JavaScript. This is JSX fancy syntax for a function which binds the value of this, which allows, like the fat arrow function allows you to define the function with a little bit less typing. If you don't love CoffeeScript, then you might like this. And then we just return a div with the list, with the name of the list title. And so the way that this works is, inside of these HTML-looking tags in JSX, you use the curly brackets to embed JavaScript. So the curly brackets inside of these tags are running JavaScript, which is why at the bottom here we have an H2 that says lists, then we have the render lists, and that's a function which we can call, and the return value of that function gets inserted at this point into the JSX, or into the rendered HTML. And then we use the same thing again, where we call the map, we call the iterator on top of the lists array, and we render a list. And so hopefully this works.
So
And maybe
this data comes from the React Mixin.
Yes,
That is the data
that's
from
a convention.
So the question is the list data comes from the React Mixin, and that's partially so that's partially true in that the getMeteorData function gets called by the React Mixin, which in turn returns this lists object. So whatever the getMeteorData function returns is available inside your render functions as this.data.
Okay.
Interestingly, this
So
works.
you're not able to use the cursor object because you always have to do a fetch to the data, and you're not able to use the data from the find, the cursor from the find.
So the question is, you're not able to use a cursor.
Because
So-
normally the find returns a cursor.
That's true. So find here does return a cursor, and you can call. You could use the cursor, but you cannot map over a cursor. The cursor doesn't have a map. So you can use cursor.forEach, which will give you a synchronous loop. But what map does here is return an array. And so if you return an array of JSX objects, then those objects automatically get created as siblings. And so you can use the cursor, but this allows you to use the .map shortcut. Interestingly, apparently this works, which it didn't used to work, and maybe this is a new thing in Meteor Beta 11, because what we were having to do is, the problem we were having is that in the render function, the value of this was not being passed into the render lists function. And so what we were having to do was, explicitly in the constructor, we were having to bind the render lists property and bind the value of this inside that function. But apparently that is not necessary because we are seeing the list.
Just show it. What we did, that's several ways.
So this is one of the ways that you can do this. So bind is a JavaScript core method, and I'm fairly new to this whole concept. But what bind does is it's a core JavaScript function in the same way as .call or .apply, and it returns a new version of this function, which, when it is called, will invoke the past function, or the function upon which bind was called, and you can predefine what the context, what the value of this should be, and also what the arguments should be. So what happens is, what we're basically saying in this constructor is this.renderLists, which is the renderLists function defined on line 18, and we're overwriting that in the class, and setting it to a version of this.render, the render lists, which has been bound to the current context. And what that means is that the value of the keyword this, inside the render lists function will be this class itself. And that allows us to use this.data. Otherwise, this.data would be undefined, because the value of this would be either an empty object or undefined. But somehow this worked in Meteor Beta 11, so maybe this is something that has been fixed recently. There's also some challenges because of the version of Babel that we're using, or that Meteor are using, and you can't define static properties on your classes, and therefore, if you want to use context, context in React is basically a way to define something at a higher component level and have it made available to all subcomponents. And so what we have to do to get around that is, after we define the class, we have to define the static properties underneath the function, like you see here, index.contentType. Because if we tried to do content type equals inside the class definition, we would get a very vague error about missing semicolons. And we would then spend the next 3 or 4 hours of our lives trying to figure out why the fuck it's not working. So this is a little tip that, but again, this is an issue to do with the version of Babel and stuff, so maybe by the time 1.3 comes out, this issue might have been resolved. So I think we have data. Maybe we can do another insert in the client. Maybe we can put the browser console at the bottom. This one. And then we can do another insert, and as if by magic, we will have a brand new object in our data. So we have a React app running with ES6 modules, getting Meteor data, rendering it into components. We've built a router, we're doing like nested components, so we have an app layout running, and we're using reactive Meteor data.
Cool.
Any questions?
True, actually. So one thing is,
Try to make them short, because I have to repeat them for the camera.
you said media methods probably don't work or something. You said something about media methods, but media methods are now the encouraged way to manipulate your data compared to allow, deny on the inserts. How do you use methods and how do you use methods with your data?
Okay, so the question is about how you use methods, because I made a comment about methods not working. So what I meant was that in the getMeteorData function, methods do not provide you with a reactive data source, and therefore you don't want to use methods in your getMeteorData function, because methods rely on a callback and not on a return value. And so you use methods in a normal way in terms of if you have an event handler and you want to change something on that event handler, or if you want to trigger some change of your data, then you can still use a method, because this is just normal JavaScript. But I was just making the point that you can't use, it doesn't make sense to use methods inside the getMeteorData function, because inside that function you want to use reactive data sources, and therefore you need to use a cursor. So that was a little bit misleading. So that's number one.
Second question. I'm starting a project right now, like I just said before. Do you think that the best practice now is to create packages, local packages for your app components to separate the logic or separate the concerns and separate global scope? Do you think that this will last, or will ES6 modules be the new standard because they're much easier to use?
So the question is, will this app and packages approach continue to be relevant, or will it be superseded by this concept of ES6 modules? It's difficult to know what the future holds, right? There's a lot of people who like to claim that React is the future, React is this, Blaze is that. There's a lot of kind of bold statements. If you can predict the future, you can just play the lottery and make a lot of money, right? So predicting the future is difficult. I think that if you use the React modules, if you use ES6 modules, you get a lot of the benefit of packages in the sense that you get code separation, you have localized scope, you can explicitly import things for testing and so on. How that will go with Meteor, It's hard to guess. I mean, I personally, I think that the whole pattern of explicit imports very much fits with the React philosophy of making everything explicit, making everything clear. It's very easy to reason about. It reminds me a lot of working with Go, and it's one of the greatest things about Go, especially when you're dealing with larger code bases, is that you can tell exactly what something is doing. You don't have to mess around with any magic. You can simply look at what's being imported, and then it's being explicitly used. But in terms of, we haven't done anything with testing, so I can't tell you how that works from a testing perspective, which is one of the main benefits of using packages, that you have these small isolated bundles. So yeah, I don't have a very,
Well, what will you do? I mean, how will you structure this production project that you're working on right now?
So the question is, how will we do it, or what are we doing right now? Right now, we're not using packages, but we're using a mixture. So we have some. This is a pattern that we've used several times on some fairly large projects. We have a small number of packages. Usually, we have a package for the models, because we have a package which is also defines all the collections. The big advantage of packages in Meteor, or one of the major advantages, has been explicit control of load order. You can define the order in which files are loaded, and you don't have as much control over that in the app itself. In some ways you do, because there's a predictable pattern, but that predictable pattern is pretty complicated to get your mind around. And so we typically use several packages. We have our own in-house base package which we use, which sets up a lot of stuff. We have a global app namespace that we use. There's a bunch of stuff that we, kind of patterns that we follow, some collection helpers and some certain things that we do. And all of those go into a base package. So we load a base package, then we have a models package where we define the collection, where we define we typically don't use libraries, but we define the kind of the schemas and stuff like that, and some of it's on the client, some of it's on the server, and sometimes we put like helpers or something that we want loaded before everything else into packages, and the rest we typically put into the app. But our focus as a company is on building products extremely quickly. So our focus is on speed at all costs. We have it written, it's the highest poster on our wall, and it says our guiding principle is progress now. Like progress now is what we're striving for. So it depends on the context. I think if you gave us a budget for 6 months and said we want to build something and we have a pretty relaxed schedule and so on, then I might take a different view. We might be more leaning towards testing and so on. But right now we have some very core stuff in packages, and the rest we put in the app directly. And we have a lot of lib folders, and we have some lib folders inside some lib folders and some of this stuff. But at the end of the day, we know the Meteor packaging kind of quirks, and so for us it works, and we're able to move quickly with it.
Yeah, it is a hassle sometimes. Explicitly importing everything, and you don't really know what you need to import with the packages. You have that import problem as well. It's very annoying.
Yeah. So yeah, explicit importing can be a hassle. But also, I mean, React is the same, right? Explicit props, passing everything in as props. It's a headache. It involves more writing of code. So for me, there's always this trade-off between sort of technical correctness and ease of maintenance versus speed of development now. Michael?
Can you provide that as source files? Maybe post it on GitHub and
The question is, can we provide that as source files? This example that we built tonight, yeah, we could create a GitHub repository in the SwitchNet. Maybe we'll, when we do the video editing, maybe we'll insert the URL of the GitHub at this point. So if you look here, you'll see the URL. Maybe in the future.